beakers, you like beakers. Let's be scientists. I like lab coats.
I'm Farouk-El-Baz. I'm the director of the Center for Remote Sensing at Boston University. I came originally from Egypt, which is a country that is 96% desert, meaning the area where people live in all of Egypt, which is like 75 million people today, live on 4% of the land. That's a very restricted area. And why? Because the rest of the land is completely barren. It is a desert where nothing grows. Why? Because it does not rain there. In some places in Egypt, in the Western Desert, it rains once in 20 to 50 years. We began exploring in this dry terrain with the very first satellite images in the early 70s to understand the sands and where the features are and what does the wind do to the surface and so on, and then asked a very simple question to myself. Where did all of this sand come from? The winds in Egypt come from the north, from the Mediterranean southward. So I looked for the source, the mother of the sand, to the north of where the sands are. And there was not a single rock from which this kind of sand could come, because the sand is made of something we call quartz, which is silicon oxide. But south of the sands are all sandstones, which are rocks that are made of this silicon oxide. So the sand in the Sahara came from the south, not from the north. But then what? How did it come here? Because the wind comes from the north to the south. So it would have come to where it is, not by wind, but by some other agent. The only other agent that would bring it from south to north through the topographic tilt is water. We began to find evidences of the way this water used to be. We find roots of plants. We find ostrich eggshells. We find hand axes left by human beings. We find all kinds of things that show between 5,000 years ago and 11,000 years ago, this very dry place in Africa was not dry at all. It was a savanna-like environment. Then there was vegetation and animals and man. Before that, there was the dry period. Before that, another wet period between 25,000 and 35,000. So they're alternating wet and dry cycles. During the wet periods, there will be plenty of rain. Rivers flow. Water collects in depressions. The water brings in sand with it. And then when the dryness comes in, the wind begins to reshape these deposits in the former lakes into the shapes of dunes.
Are you saying that the sand dunes we see in all those places in the desert were brought there by water?
Including the sand itself, including everywhere in the U.S., the Yuma dunes, the Colorado, everywhere in the world. If you find sand in large amounts, it's in the shape of dunes today, but it wasn't in the past. It was in the shape of a lake deposit. It came into a lake, and this is a very significant geological thing. It's not a small potato.